Shakespeare's my favorite in all of English lit. Some people pitch a fit when I start asking who wrote those marvelous plays. They tell me to shut my trap, that they don't want to flap. Nothing to unwrap about no authorship mystery. Truly, though, a merchant in grain who wrote knavery, as with Richard III, though Henry V is possibly worse. And in comedy, how about Dogberry and the Dromios and Juliet's nurse? Shakespeare is infinite, Shakespeare's illiterate. Something here doesn't fit the Stratford story. Someone illuminate me. As for tragedy, there's Mark Antony. Lear and Hamlet are absolute gold. Puck is magical, but most tragical is the rubbish we have been told. Something just won't cohere, Stratford's a myth, I fear. Who is this Earl de Vere that I've heard of? Someone illuminate me. In those plays, I want illumination.
Welcome all to Shakespeare Illuminated, where we want to shed light on each of Shakespeare's plays. I'm sorry, that song cracks me up. I'm Michael Delahoyde, graduate of Croft Road Junior High School and later the University of Michigan, and professor of English. And I am possessed. Shakespeare took over my life many years ago, but it's a great spirit to be inhabited by. Our mission is to appreciate the brilliance of Shakespeare's plays, and when faced with odd concerns and baffling passages, to speculate. Can we understand his work further through consideration of the Shakespeare Authorship Question? That is, if we free ourselves from the strained and goofy notion that the works were written by the Stratfordian grain merchant Shakespeare, and instead by Edward de Vere, 17th Earl of Oxford, using the pen name Shakespeare, such is the so-called Oxfordian perspective, are the Shakespeare works better illuminated? This series is sponsored by the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship, whose website, shakespeareoxfordfellowship.org, can inform you much more about this perspective. You may want to be careful how you handle the Oxfordian information given in this series. Know that the issue of the Shakespeare authorship is hotly contested and too typically meets with hostility, especially in schools and colleges, where with religious intensity, it's even labeled a heresy by the Orthodox. We don't want anybody flunking English because of someone else's unawareness or intolerance. But want to be in possession of some suppressed knowledge? You can enter comments into chat, which I'll try to keep an eye on. And if you have a more formal question, you can hit the Q&A button down there. If I do not address these during the hour or so, stick around for a Q&A, this time immediately following. We're going to revel now in one of Shakespeare's best-known plays, Julius Caesar, where we witness growing concern among politicians in ancient Rome over Caesar's increasing power and popularity. Convinced that Rome will return to tyranny and that they must be liberators, Cassius succeeds in bringing Caesar's friend and kinsman Brutus into an assassination conspiracy. When this bloody act is carried out, Caesar's friend and supporter Mark Antony whips up the populace against the assassins. The young Octavius, eventually Octavius Caesar, eventually Caesar Augustus, Julius Caesar's heir, and Antony join forces and go to war against Cassius and Brutus, pursuing both unto the latter's suicides. Here's some general questions we might want to try addressing. Why is Julius Caesar such a staple in secondary school curricula? Why is the play focused more on Brutus than on Caesar? How to explain the anachronisms and contradictions concerning time? What differences in the last two acts leave most audiences feeling disappointed? And note, we'll be spending more of this hour plus on the first acts than the last two. So, here we go. You know what? I want to address that first question right away. Why is this such a standard in high school curricula? Uh, it might be initially baffling, but I think it's explicable. First of all, back in the day, there used to be classics departments, classical studies departments in universities where they would have busts of Vespasian and emperors, and collecting dust. But you'd have to learn a lot of history and maybe some literature from the Greeks and the Romans. Shakespeare, as he did with medieval lovers, all the famous lovers from the past, and he gives us Romeo and Juliet, and now they're superseded. He did the same thing with Julius Caesar. And so now all classical departments are probably squashed into English if they still exist at all, or history. But in other words, Julius Caesar, it's good for you. Stuff you should know. All right. Well, that's one. But I think also secondary schools might like it because it's got a nice reductive moral that you can propagandize. Rebels against authorities never prosper. So stop making pranks against the assistant principal. Uh, Additionally, like as we'll see, beware peer pressure, you little Romans. And then finally, it seems as if Julius Caesar is one of the few Shakespeare plays that doesn't have any obvious bawdy puns or sex. Eh, oh, we just lost 43 viewers. Well, anyway, um, so maybe that's partially an explanation for its popularity. I had to suffer it in 10th grade. All right, the play begins with these people, the mechanicals, the workmen. They're wanting to celebrate the celebratory, joyous concern of Caesar to Rome. And these politicians, two of them, are berating the people. Hence, home, you idle creatures. Is this a holiday? You blocks, you stones. They're chiding them for first supporting Pompey, who Caesar was warring against, and now this fickle populace is supporting Caesar. And worse than that, they are going about defying sumptuary laws, that is, not wearing the clothes and the signs of their profession that they're supposed to. So clearly, everybody's forgetting their station, everybody's getting uppity, the caste system is jeopardized, reading itself is in danger. Um, so one of them, a commoner, a cobbler, starts to get a little cheeky with these guys. And when asked his trade, he says, "Truly, sir, in respect of a fine workman, I am but, as you would say, a cobbler." And this is really subtle, and I don't think anybody else has detected it. But why the delicacy of phrase, as you would say? A cobbler is a cobbler. There's no secret term for it. Or is the emphasis on but, as you would say? I am but, as you would say, a cobbler. In other words, you arrogant snob, you would think I'm a lowly cobbler. Anyway, this cheeky guy gets away with some more punning on soles, like he repairs soles, the bottom of the shoe, but also like soles, and so on. And I just wonder, why does Shakespeare occasionally, seemingly arbitrarily, give us these cobblers or shoemakers or considers these kinds of professions? Um, the famous Henry V St. Crispin's Day speech. It's glorious, and people quote that like crazy. But who's St. Crispin? Well, the patron saint of cobblers and shoemakers. What? How arbitrary. Well, I wonder if this occasional subtle reference is because Shakespeare is liking the influence of Chaucer. Chaucer, Chaucier, shoemaker in French. There are other subtleties where he gets Chaucer in. But for us, although these two come off as aristocratic snobs, the view towards the masses is something that Shakespeare does, in fact, validate again and again, even in this play coming. That is, that the rabble are easily manipulated, they're fickle, They're just a bunch of goobers. Um, that's an aristocratic point of view, and it doesn't make a lot of sense coming from one of their own, the the workmen, like a grain merchant. But it is a view typically held by nobles, and it's absolutely consistent in Shakespeare. Well, in the second scene of Act One, Caesar enters, and in spite of the gripe that these politicians, about Caesar's getting too much power and he's going to be a tyrant, he's going to become a king, and we're going to revert to a political system we don't want anymore. They already treat him like a king, the hypocrites. So he comes in and someone says, "Peace ho, Caesar speaks." There's going to be a foot race, part of the Lupercal ceremony, some Roman holiday. And Caesar asks his wife Calpurnia to be present so that when Mark Antony runs by, he can touch her. And supposedly there's some superstition that that'll make her more fertile or some crazy thing. When Caesar says, "Do this," it is performed. And again, they're treating him like this. But the worry is, and the ambiguity begins, what are we supposed to think of Caesar here? Is he so flawed that he is that superstitious? Is he so worried that his wife isn't sufficiently fertile and he's actually got some dynastic interests? Um, that's the concern. So he's got now a soothsayer calling out to him, "Beware the Ides of March." Caesar occasionally talks about himself in the third person, and that's always a worry too when you've got someone doing that or using the royal we. Um, you got to think, what's the phenomenon there? Is it that you're thinking of yourself in a kind of a schizoid way as a construct? So this is why you see this in Hollywood a lot, where people talk about themselves as that thing over there. So is that a worry? But then Caesar dismisses this soothsayer, saying he's a dreamer. So Caesar's not superstitious? We don't know. Um, he suffers from various physical infirmities that we find out about because very soon Cassius, who is a malcontent, starts feeling out Brutus and seeing, is he worried too about Caesar? And Brutus doesn't say much. He's reticent to explain what's troubling him. But Cassius asks him, "Can you really see yourself?" And Brutus says, "No, because the eye sees not itself, but by reflection in other things." And I can't believe that Shakespeare didn't anticipate mid 20th century existentialism, whereby the flaw in humankind is thinking that you need other people because you need them to reflect back what you are instead of being an authentic self. But Brutus is the one who's flawed here, not so much Caesar, maybe. Um, Cassius recounts incidents where Caesar was in a swimming contest, like Beowulf, actually. It's kind of weird. And just needed help at a certain point. And he was acting when he had a fever as a sick girl. And Cassius doesn't say anything about Caesar's policies or politics or all of that. He just tries to point out all his weaknesses physically. Well, Cassius also preys on Brutus in referring to Brutus's noble family. And that means primarily the ancient Brutus, who is spoken of in the Lucrece poem by Shakespeare, when ancient Rome was suffering under a tyranny by a family that included the rapist and all the rest. And we had to get rid of them. The rape of Lucrece was the final straw. Brutus came forth as a hero, the antique one, and threw out this corrupt monarchy. And then they established the Roman Republic, which they are so reverent of that any threat like Shakespeare freaks him out. So, what becomes relevant here for Oxfordians is why even take up this subject matter? Well, Caesar's an important guy, but Caesar's going to be dead halfway through the play. Probably more autobiographically electric would be that Brutus being seduced into conspiracy is a parallel to Oxford having been trying to be seduced into a conspiracy when after he got along perfectly well, especially with Italian art and literature and theater and all the rest, with his cousin Henry Howard and some others, they made it clear that they were more interested in the politics, not the arts. And in other words, what about the Catholicism? Let's get Elizabeth ousted, probably killed, and put Mary Queen of Scots back on the throne and return England into a Catholic country. When Oxford realized how serious this was, he ratted them out to Queen Elizabeth in the Christmas season of 1580, and they flipped out and accused Oxford of everything under the sun. But it seems like in this play, the motivation for all the focus on Brutus is to show here's how they work on you. Here's how conspirators try to suck you in. I'm going to admit that this is troubling because Oxford seems to have considered what are the implications of rebellion like that. And not just in this play, but Macbeth. What happens if you actually kill a king? Additionally, there are passages underlined in Oxford's Geneva Bible that's at the Folger in Washington, D.C. right now that concern regicide. What happens if you kill a king, an anointed king, or a queen, or a monarch, or head of state? So at the very least, he ruminated about this. And in the plays, he played it out and fortunately came to the conclusion, it seems like it's probably a bad idea. Well, Caesar returns after this dialogue between Cassius and Brutus. He returns from the games with Mark Antony, and he has this exchange with Antony.
Antonius,
Caesar,
let me have men about me that are fat, sleek-headed men and such as sleep o' nights. Yon Cassius has a lean and hungry look. He thinks too much. Such men are dangerous.
fear him not, Caesar. He's not dangerous. He's a noble Roman and well given.
Would he were fatter, but I fear him not. Yet if my name were liable to fear, I do not know the man I should avoid so soon as that spare Cassius. He reads much. He is a great observer, and he looks quite through the deeds of men. He loves no plays, as thou dost, Antony. He hears no music. Seldom he smiles, and smiles in such a sort as if he mocked himself and scorned his spirit that could be moved to smile at anything. Such men as he be never at heart's ease, whilst they behold a greater than themselves. And therefore are they very dangerous. I rather tell thee what is to be feared than what I fear, for always I am Caesar. Come on my right hand, for this ear is deaf, and tell me truly what thou thinkst of him.
He's got good instincts. He's on the mark about Cassius. So he's a good reader of people. And Cassius doesn't like plays or music or the arts. So that's the kind of politician he is. Puritanical prude. And then that touch of deafness that Shakespeare makes up, it's not in the source. is another one of these weaknesses. So the situation is you have to ask, okay, he's got these weaknesses. Does that make him a bad leader? Anyway, um, the main source for this is going to be Plutarch, the lives of the noble Grecians and Romans. And we know that the Earl of Oxford, in some kind of Renaissance Amazon deal, had ordered Plutarch um, as translated in 1579, but he could have read the original too in any of the libraries that he had encountered. Another couple sources, one was written by his one of his tutors when he was very young, and another written by Arthur Golding, his uncle and tutor, and in a work dedicated to the Earl of Oxford too. So those are the sources that he's using or straying from. Well, this is after that event, and Cassius and Brutus now rope in Casca, another guy who witnessed what was going on, and they ask him, what was all the noise about? What was going on? What did you witness? What did you see? And Casca says that, well, there was this big to-do where somebody, Mark Antony, offered a crown to Caesar, and all the people cheered, and it was it was embarrassing. And Caesar, put it aside, although I think he probably wanted it. Well, there was some more noise. What was that? Yeah, it was the same thing. It was offered the crown again, and he put it aside and said no. Yeah, but what about there was a third thing? Yeah, yeah, yeah. It was the same thing again. He was offered a crown. Unfortunately, what happened was that he went into one of his epileptic seizures and fell on the ground, and people were upset about this. But it was mere foolery, says Casca. Also, it wasn't really a crown. It was more like a coronet, kind of headgear for an earl rather than a king. But I made no note of it. It was mere foolery. Well, Cassius says, see, this is exactly what I warned you about. We got to stop this guy. Because why? So I don't know. Here's my question. If you're at the Super Bowl and you had been to Burger King and gotten kind of like a cardboard crown, and you were close enough to Taylor Swift to say, "Oh, I want you to have this. I'm such a fan." And she said, "No, no, no, no. The thing smells like ketchup." And you said, tried it again. And she eventually just went along with it because, it was a great gag and people were cheering and all that and laughing and having a good time. And she put it on her head. Does that make her Queen of America? So I don't know what coronation ceremony necessarily requires in ancient Rome. But it does seem like this was just good-natured theater. And that is a concern in this play all the way through. Brutus is concerned with theater, spectacle, how things look, but he's really bad at it. And it seems like it's another problem of reading. Are we reading this correctly? Well, why didn't we get to see it directly? And all we got is this snide Casca guy who says, finally, in a Weasley way, I could say more, but I've kind of forgotten right now. And so Cassius says, well, you want to come to dinner and tell us some more about what happened? No, I'm really busy. How about tomorrow night? Yeah, okay. So Casca gets a free dinner out of this questionable report. All right, we disperse. Cassius is left, and he tells us all that he's going to manufacture a mandate from the people against Brutus. So we're going to come up with fake letters, throw them in at Brutus's window from pretend people, and say, "Oh, Brutus, save us like your ancestor. Please do something about this potential tyranny." In the last scene of Act One, about a month later, Casca comes in and declares himself no fleering telltale. Well, that's all you've been so far, Casca. And there are reports of these strange signs. There's a storm. A slave had what looked like a burning hand. There was a lion wandering down the street. There was an owl hooting in the marketplace at noon. So, see, chaos. The world's going to hell. We got to kill somebody. Um, Typically, again, do these signs signify anything? How are you going to interpret them? And that is going to be completely slippery. So we're going to get a conspiracy together, and let's meet at Pompey's Porch, which was a theater portico built by Pompey in 55. Now he's off the scene, but it's a weird place where we're blurring politics and theater, and we end up not meeting there anyway. We meet in Brutus's orchard. So it does seem as if there has been some revision and compression or some disjointed matters in this play. All right. The second act begins with Brutus agonizing in his orchard, kind of a Garden of Gethsemane scene, concerning what to do about Caesar. He calls for his boy servant to find out what time it is and to get him some light. And the kid's name is Lucius, which means or is associated with light too. So it's pretty heavy symbolism. Brutus doesn't know what time of day it is, and he's completely in the dark. So he delivers kind of a nightmare soliloquy in his orchard. And here is what he has to say about Caesar.
It must be by his death. And for my part, I know no personal cause to spurn at him but for the general. He would be crowned. How that might change his nature. There's the question. It is the bright day that brings forth the adder, and that craves wary walking. Crown him that. And then I grant we put a sting in him that at his will he may do danger with. The abuse of greatness is when it disjoins remorse from power. And to speak truth of Caesar, I have not known when his affection swayed more than his reason. But 'tis a common proof that lowliness is young ambition's ladder, which to the climber upward turns his face. But when he once attains the utmost round, he then unto the ladder turns his back, looks in the clouds, scorning the base degrees by which he did ascend. So Caesar may. Then, lest he may, prevent. And since the quarrel will bear no colour for the thing he is, fashion it thus, that what he is augmented would run to these and these extremities, and therefore think him as a serpent's egg, which hatched, would, as his kind, grow mischievous, and kill him in the shell.
Spurious reasoning. Brutus asks the boy when he comes back after that rumination, is not tomorrow, boy, the, and all your editions will probably say Ides of March. That's where we're headed. But the first folio reads, is not tomorrow, boy, the 1st of March? A mistake? What's going on? But we'll have other time problems too, like this chiming clock that's anachronistic and other disjoints about where we are in time. It would be nice if it were a few days later, this accident, because the difference of 11 days is relevant. The Julian calendar, which everybody had been operating under since the time of Julius Caesar, was off a little bit, so that every 100 and so years you'd get more and more off in time. Pope Gregory rectified this in 1582 with a better calendar, and a lot of Europe adopted it, but England held out. They didn't want to. So in Europe, you're operating under two different time frames, and this is weird and disjointed. The time is out of joint, and it's not just in this play. So I have to wonder, did Shakespeare intentionally get us all messed up in time to make a point about that? Well, anyway, in 1752, England finally went with it. But the uh, servant boy also brings in one of these letters that's a hoax, and Brutus reads it, and he's asked to see himself and liberate us. Um, as instructed, Lucius then consults the calendar, and then we get this other problem. March is wasted 15 days, he says. So if March is wasted 15 days, tomorrow is the 16th. So you don't beware the Ides of March. We got through it. So again, the time is out of joint. Brutus then hears a knock within. It's an interesting and rare for Shakespeare stage direction. And the same thing happens for Macbeth, knock within. Keen if you don't hear it, because that could be symbolic, that he's hearing a knock within. There's something in his conscience that's hitting him. But in this case, there are the conspirators at the door. And like noble liberators for a politically bright future, they come in the dark, in the middle of the night, with hoods over their heads and disguised, skulking around. What's bizarre is that Cassius wants to talk to Brutus, and he draws him aside for this conversation. Shouldn't be that be what we're interested in? But what we're left with is not that. We're left with these other conspirators passing some time while we get the main guys back again. One of them says, "Here lies the east. Doth not the day break here?" Casca says, "No." Another one says, "No, pardon, sir, it doth, and yon gray lines that fret the clouds are messengers of the day." Casca says, "You shall confess you are both deceived. Here, as I point my sword, the sun arises." And a lot of productions now, it's fashionable to have him point his sword because Brutus is coming back and they're going to have a conversation. Wow. So that's really sweeping and deeply symbolic. The problem is, he goes on, "Here as I point my sword, the sun arises, which is a great way growing on the south way in the youthful season of the year. So too must blah, 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 blah." So if you're going to be deep and symbolic and point to Brutus as the sun, then you got to leave out all those other lines. My favorite critic says, no, 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 no. The point here is not hooray, but rather you've got these people who are self-appointed prophets and activists for the political future, and these dopes can't even figure out where the damn sun's coming up. Well, Brutus is appealed to. Let's all swear an oath. And he says, no, 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 because we're acting honorably and we don't need additional motivation. And then someone else says, after we kill Caesar, we ought to kill Mark Antony too. And Brutus thinks, no, 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 our course will seem too bloody and we didn't need to worry about him. We need to be thought of as sacrificers, not butchers. And he explains it this way. Well, explains. "Let us be sacrificers, but not butchers. We all stand up against the spirit of Caesar, and in the spirit of men there is no blood. Oh, that we then could come by Caesar's spirit and not dismember Caesar, but alas, Caesar must bleed for it. And, gentle friends, let's kill him boldly, but not wrathfully. Let's carve him as a dish fit for the gods, not hew him as a carcass fit for hounds." My favorite critic again translates. 1. The spirit of men contains no blood. 2. We wish to destroy the spirit of Caesar. Therefore, 3. We must spill his blood. Self-delusion. A clock chimes. There is no clock in ancient Rome. So that's another one of these anachronisms where either Shakespeare is an idiot or he's doing something really subtle and clever. The conspirators depart, and Brutus realizes that Lucius has fallen asleep. Brutus's wife Portia enters, and she knows that something's really troubling him, and she wants to help. But he is reluctant to say what it is. And she says, "Hey, I am Cato's, the respected Cato. I am his daughter, and you are my husband, and you should be telling me what the problem is. And also, I also stabbed myself in the thigh, and I'm bleeding all over." I don't know. I guess this is just a show of stoicism and masochism and ability to cope with pain. Brutus is supposedly a subscriber to the Stoic philosophy, which means you endure hardships without complaining. You're very steady. Don't let emotions get in the way. So maybe she's showing that she's as good a Stoic as he is. Anyway, he promises later on, I'll tell you what this is all about, but not right now. Lucius wakes up and brings in another potential conspirator, Caius Ligarius. And this guy has been really sick lately, but maybe there's hope that he can join us too. And so we have dismissed Lucius, light. He dismisses his wife, and he embraces sickness. Next, on a stormy night, Calpurnia, Caesar's wife, has horrible dreams and notes all these other new omens that we have to read. There have been graves yawned and yielded up the dead. Horses did neigh and dying men did groan, if you can believe that. Whoa, weird, Wilbur. Horses neighed. Well, just shows you. She hopes that Caesar's not going to leave the house. Well, Caesar nobly says that cowards die many times before their deaths, and the valiant never taste of death but once. In other words, you can't just be a chicken all the time. It's very reminiscent of what Hector does when he's trying to comfort his wife, Andromache, in Homer's Iliad. And she's saying, we lose you, we lose everything. And he tells her, take comfort. Everybody's fated to die. So cheer up. But there actually is a way where you can make that a positive statement and not bleak, but it takes kind of a trick of the mind. There's an issue of reading again because there's been another omen. Some chicken was discovered without a heart. And so one of the conspirators comes in because they're going to gather with Caesar and has an alternate reading for this circulatorily impaired chicken. Calpurnia had a dream about people bathing their hands in the fountain of Caesar with his wounds. And this guy says, "Oh, no, it's a really good thing because it's like cleansing." And we're reading back and forth these ambiguous signs, which don't tell us anything. And finally, when the conspirators have gathered and they're saying, like, well, if I go to the Senate and say you're not coming today, they're going to offer you a crown. So, if I go back, they're going to say, well, maybe reconsider, and it's going to be embarrassment to you. And, if I have to say, well, his wife had a dream. So Caesar realizes, okay, well, yeah, I'm going to go after all. It's 8 o'clock in the morning. All the conspirators, except Cassius, which is another weirdness. We don't know why he didn't show up. That was a flaw or a change or a revision. Anyway, they're going to go to the Capitol, and Caesar says, first, let's go drink some wine. And then, like friends, we'll go to the Capitol. Well, like friends, it's kind of grim. But I got to say, at 8 o'clock in the morning, this guy's offering me wine. I have no problem with his swimming contests or his deafness or anything. This is my guy. There's an Artemidorus character, some random character, who has written a letter to Caesar, and somehow he knows about the conspiracy and he knows all the list of people that are belonging to it. And he's really in the know because some of these people just joined the conspiracy moments ago, but he's going to send this to Caesar. He's not going to get the chance. He's going to get the chance, but Caesar's going to deny it. So it's mid-March, 44 BCE, and Caesar, Antony, conspirators arrive at the capital. The Ides of March soothsayers there and say, yeah. And Caesar snarks about not being dead yet. The Ides of March are come. Aye, Caesar, but not gone yet. That Artemidorus tries to pass that letter to Caesar, but Caesar really nobly says, if this concerns me, that is not primary. I'm here to do the people's business, basically. Cassius and Brutus are paranoid. They're looking at everybody. Oh, he's talking to Caesar. Can you read his face? What's he looking like? Do you think that? No, it looks okay. They're laughing and it's okay. So maybe he didn't. Caesar begins the proceedings at the Senate and asks, are we all ready? What is now amiss that Caesar and his Senate must redress? And then you think, uh-oh, his Senate? I don't know what to think about this guy. Well, the conspirators come up with this notion that we have to beg Caesar to reverse his decision on one guy's brother's exile. And Caesar has a famous moment where he says this.
I could be well moved, if I were as you. If I could pray to move, prayers would move me. But I am constant as the northern star, of whose true fixed and resting quality there is no fellow in the firmament. The skies are painted with unnumbered sparks, they are all fire, and every one doth shine. But there's but one in all doth hold his place. So in the world, 'tis furnished well with men, and men are flesh and blood and apprehensive. Yet in the number I do know but one that unassailable holds on his rank, unshaked of motion, and that I am he. Let me a little show it, even in this, that I was constant, Simba should be banished, and constant do remain to keep him so.
Caesar might be idealizing himself, but he is accurate and admirable. Well, Casca and the conspirators are gathering around, and Casca, speak hands for me, is the first to stab Caesar. And then all the others attack him. Finally, he'll stagger towards Brutus, who he thinks he can trust, but we get this famous line.
Et tu, Brute? Then fall, Caesar.
Well, now we can all shout liberty and freedom, supposedly. There's a recommendation we amend that to liberty, freedom, and enfranchisement. Rather cumbersome slogan, I'd say. Enfranchisement means inclusion, but it sounds more like the right to serve as middle management at a fast food joint. But these aren't the best PR people for themselves. Mark Antony is run home, and it seems like, chaos has broken out. It's as if it were doomsday. Brutus, really scummy, says that, well, we have at least released Caesar from worrying about death for the rest of his life. Well, thank you. Brutus thinks, here's what we've got to do. We don't want to give the impression that we're butchers. We want to hold our swords aloft proudly, march through the streets saying peace, freedom, and liberty. And we're also going to have to bathe our hands in Caesar's blood. So Good theater, right? People will really respond to enfranchisement rather than look at blood dripping off your hands. Well, Cassius remarks when they bathe their hands in Caesar's blood. I don't know what it's supposed to symbolize. How many ages hence shall this our lofty scene be acted over, in states unborn and accents yet unknown? He is saying, how many times in the future will there be assassinations of major political figures? Brutus adds, how many times shall Caesar bleed in sport that now on Pompey's basis lies along, no worthier than the dust? He's thinking of it theatrically, poorly, but theatrically. Bleeding in sport. So the death of Caesar, as in the Shakespeare play that we're in the midst of right now, will be played on the stage. Yeah, not getting the political reality here. Well, Mark Antony comes back, who realizes he's on slippery ground, he says gruesomely, because we don't know if he is also slated to be killed. But they convince him, no, 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 you're fine with us. And we want to shake hands with everybody. And it's called a roll call of doom. Mark Antony shakes hands with all of the conspirators, gets blood on his own hands from them, but he names them all too. And eventually they're in trouble. Well, here's what we're got to do. Brutus is going to go out and explain to the people why this is not a savage spectacle at all. And Antony can come out and give a eulogy over Caesar at his funeral. Cassius says, are you sure we should do this? Brutus says, what's the problem? I'm going to speak first. Great. So you're giving him the last word. What could go wrong? So the conspirators leave and they're planning their show, and Antony speaks to Caesar's corpse in a scene right here.
Oh, pardon me, thou bleeding piece of earth, that I am meek and gentle with these butchers. Thou art the ruins of the noblest man that ever lived in the tide of times. Woe to the hand that shed this costly blood. Over thy wounds now do I prophesy, which like dumb mouths do ope their ruby lips to take the voice and utterance of my tongue. A curse shall light upon the limbs of men. Domestic fury and fierce civil strife shall cumber all the parts of Italy. Blood and destruction shall be so in use, and dreadful objects so familiar, that mothers shall but smile when they behold their infants quartered with the hands of war. All pity choked with custom of fell deeds. And Caesar's spirit, ranging for revenge with Ate by his side, come hot from hell, shall in these confines with a monarch's voice cry havoc and let slip the dogs of war. This foul deed shall smell above the earth, with carrion men groaning for burial.
Brutus and Cassius divide the unsettled crowd at the forum and prepare to explain what is this assassination. There are different opinions about Brutus's initial speech, but see what you think.
Romans, countrymen and lovers, hear me for my cause, and be silent that you may hear. Believe me for mine honour, and have respect to mine honour that you may believe. Censure me in your wisdom, and awake your senses that you may the better judge. If there be any in this assembly, any dear friend of Caesar's, to him I say that Brutus' love to Caesar was no less than his. If then that friend demand why Brutus rose against Caesar, this is my answer. Not that I love Caesar less, but that I loved Rome more. Had you rather Caesar were living, to die all slaves, than that Caesar were dead, to live all free men? As Caesar loved me, I weep for him. As he was fortunate, I rejoice at it. As he was valiant, I honour him. But as he was ambitious, I slew him. there is tears for his love, joy for his fortune, honor for his valor, and death for his ambition. Who is here so base there would be a bondman? If any speak, for him have I offended. Who is here so rude there would not be a Roman? If any speak, for him have I offended. Who is here so vile that would not love his country? If any speak, for him have I offended. I pause for a reply. Then none have I offended. I have done no more to Caesar than you shall do to Brutus. The question of his death is enrolled in the Capitol. His glory not extenuated, wherein he was worthy, nor his offences enforced, for which he suffered death.
That was in prose, and Antony's going to be in verse, which might make a difference. Anyway, proof that the people are not worthy of liberty or anything is that they don't get it. They say, hey, let Brutus be king now. Let him be Caesar, they say. So the irony is they neither want nor deserve liberty exactly. Well, Brutus announces he's going to depart, and he introduces Mark Antony, and we've allowed Mark Antony to stand here and speak to you all. And he gives the much more effective speech right now.
Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. The evil that men do lives after them. The good is interred with their bones, so let it be with Caesar. The noble Brutus hath told you Caesar was ambitious. If it were so, it was a grievous fault, and grievously hath Caesar answered it. Here, under leave of Brutus and the rest, for Brutus is an honorable man, so are they all honorable men, come I to speak at Caesar's funeral. He was my friend, faithful and just to me, but Brutus says he was ambitious, and Brutus is an honorable man. He hath brought many captives home to Rome, whose ransoms did the general coffers fill. Did this in Caesar seem ambitious? When the poor have cried, Caesar hath wept. Ambition should be made of sterner stuff. Yet Brutus says he was ambitious, and Brutus is an honorable man. You all did see that on the Lupercal I thrice presented him a kingly crown, which he did thrice refuse. Was this ambition? Yet Brutus says he was ambitious, and Brutus is an honorable man. And sure, he is an honorable man. I speak not to disprove what Brutus spoke, but here I am to speak what I do know. You all did love him once, not without cause. What cause withholds you then to mourn for him? O judgment, thou art fled to prudish beasts, and men have lost the reason. Bear with me, my heart is in the coffin there with Caesar, and I must pause till it come back to me.
Antony is successfully hypnotic in his speech. And of course, the building irony about honorable man works subtly. He also is better at this than Brutus, in that Brutus had said, all our explanations are in a document and we've registered it over at the archive. So, when you're not busy cobbling, you can check it out. Not as effective as Antony saying, I have here the will of Caesar, Caesar's will. And it's so dramatic that you don't wonder, as you should, when did he have time to rummage through Caesar's underwear drawer to find this will in between the murder and the rest, but he's got a prop and it works. He asks to come down. Are you going to let me come down and I'll show you Caesar and, eulogize him even more? Yes, yes, come down. And he kneels over the corpse of Caesar and starts looking at the wounds and says, oh, this one Casca gave him. And oh, Lord, look where the blood spurted out there. And this is where Brutus, Caesar's angel, he really trusted this guy. This was the most unkindest cut of all. Yeah, but Antony wasn't there. So how does he detect which these wounds are given and these gashes and the toga and the rest? But it's good theater. He's really good at it. Well, eventually we get back to the will. Turns out, and according to Plutarch, this seems to be true, that Caesar left so many drachmas to every person, and he left his lands for roaming and strolling. Again, when you have a day off from cobbling, you can go through the park and look at the lovely trees. So they are Julius Caesar's heirs, but the real one's actually on the way. So the crowd is moved against these conspirators. They go crazy. They become a mob, a murderous mob, and they want to burn and kill everybody. And Antony gloats over this rabble rousing too. But on the way is going to be Octavius, who is Caesar's actual heir and grandnephew or something. A very young man, about 19 at the time when this was happening, but he's going to prove to be this new kind of political figure. We get one scene where the mob decides, because Cinna has the same name as one of the conspirators, though he is an innocent poet, we're going to kill him too. So bad times for artists. Now, we shift to this second phase of the play, Acts 4 and 5. And as I mentioned, they seem to have been added, or there's some inconsistency here. Is this a different play? So because of inconsistencies in characters, such as Cassius being much more sympathetic now instead of a fiend, and maybe Brutus, and just the whole feel of the thing, we feel like we're in a separate world. It has been suggested by lots of Shakespeareans that maybe there was a full play, The Assassination of Caesar, and then we kind of couldn't leave it at that. We needed to find out what happens to Brutus and Cassius, since they were such a big part of the play. And you get this other play that was somehow rather awkwardly appended to the first. Hence the compressions and inconsistencies in the first bit. Generally, the consensus is that these acts are anticlimactic, pretty disappointing. And possibly one of the reasons for it being lackluster and whatever happened to Casca and all the other questions is that because the first part of the play had to do with that seduction into the conspiracy that Oxford experienced, and these acts have to do with just the consequences, which are mostly on the battlefield military. And Oxford seems to have had little or no military experience, that it doesn't have the electricity, the autobiographical intensity of the first parts. So the beginning of Act 4, we've got the conspirators on the run. Antony, Octavius, and a third guy in this new triumvirate, Lepidus, are making lists of people to be killed, and they're almost trying to outdo each other. Well, your brother has to go, okay, but your nephew has to go. And so that whole idea of liberty and freedom and avoiding tyranny and bloodshed didn't work out so hot. Let's kill Caesar to avoid tyranny. Bad idea. Then we've got Brutus and Cassius meeting. Brutus doesn't want to have this contention because there's been some problem between the two out in public. And so he says, come into my tent so we're not being viewed by all the soldiers. So apparently some debates should be handled privately instead of as a public spectacle, Brutus. In the tent, there is an argument about how Cassius was supposed to send money, but Brutus is so honorable that he can't accept bribes, but Cassius can. And somehow Brutus is saying that Cassius has to raise money for him and send it to his soldiers and all the rest. And it seems a little bit hypocritical. But eventually it comes out that Brutus might be a little bit upset because his wife died. She swallowed fire. Portia is dead. And it seems like either she swallowed hot coals or she put them in her mouth, Plutarch implies. But in any case, she's dead. And it might be that Brutus holding up against this is an example of his Stoic philosophy, that emotions don't get to him. But the weird thing is, some soldiers come in and report how things are going on the battlefield. And one of them says, "Have you heard from your wife?" "No, what?" "She's dead." "Well, wish she had died another time, but we got to get on with business." So either this is another problem that one of those scenes should have been canceled and revision has taken place, or is it that Brutus is given an opportunity to show how stoic he is in front of the other soldiers, where even the death of his own wife he doesn't even ask about? How did that happen? Well, once the soldiers depart, Lucius, the boy, is supposed to sing, but he's exhausted and he falls asleep. And Brutus is absolutely tender and beautiful about this. But the spirit of Caesar apparently shows up. Now, in Hamlet, you've got other witnesses to the ghost. In Macbeth, you got other witnesses to the witches, but here there's no other witness. So you could, if you like, say that this is a projection of Brutus's guilt when he sees Caesar telling him, "I will meet you at Philippi." Everybody thinks it's a bad idea militarily, but we're going to meet at Philippi. Brutus and Cassius have a brief interview with Octavius and Antony. And Antony and Octavius are called Octavius, a peevish schoolboy, joined with Antony, a masker and a reveler. And he will be more of that in the next play, Antony and Cleopatra. Anyway, Cassius notes that it's his birthday and we're having kind of grim feelings about it all. But he's also worried about omens. Now, Cassius is supposed to be an Epicurean, which doesn't have a lot to do with gluttony. It's more a matter of not believing in signs or signs from God and all of that. But either we've got inconsistency here, or else Cassius has come over to a different point of view. Because now there's ravens and crows and kites and all kinds of weird birds from Alfred Hitchcock movies that are haunting us. Cassius sees that one of his men who he sends out has been surrounded, and he thinks, oh no, he's been captured. The day has been lost, and he's got to kill himself. He misreads, because actually those are Brutus's soldiers. They're celebrating and embracing him, and we're cheering and all that. But Cassius from behind the rock doesn't realize that's the case. So he decides he's got to commit suicide. Pretty soon, Brutus comes upon the corpse of Cassius, realizes the tragedy, and gives this eulogy.
The last of all the Romans, fare thee well. It is impossible that ever Rome should breed thy fellow. Friends, I owe more tears to this dead man than you shall see me pay. I shall find time, Cassius. I shall find time. Come, therefore, and to Thassos send his body. His funeral shall not be in our camp, lest it discomfort us. Lucilius, come. And come, young Cato, let us to the field. Labio and Flavius, set our battles on. 'Tis 3 o'clock, and Romans yet ere night. We shall try fortune in a second fight.
Similar to what Macbeth says when he finds out about his wife's death. Bad timing. Some other time, I'll cry. Well, in one weird scene, this happens elsewhere in Shakespeare too. We've got these fraud identity Brutuses out on the field. So the soldiers capture this guy and they say, hey, we've got Brutus. And Antony comes over and says, that's not the right guy. Now, I can't even imagine that's a legitimate military strategy, but it is an issue of identity. And so, again, not surprising to find it in a Shakespeare play, maybe. Brutus is exhausted. He's got a small band of men left, and he's realized we're done. He keeps asking everyone to kill him, and they'd rather not. But eventually, he's got one to hold the sword, and he runs on it, and he kills himself too. Off stage, Brutus's army has been captured. Octavius and Antony have won the day. And it is Antony and Octavius and others who stumble upon the body of Brutus. And once again, Brutus's eulogy, perfectly lovely for Cassius, but Antony effortlessly outdoes him with more memorable lines right here.
This was the noblest Roman of them all. All the conspirators, save only he, did that they did in envy of great Caesar. He only, in a general honest thought and common good to all, made one of them. His life was gentle, and the elements so mixed in him that nature might stand up and say to all the world, this was a man.
Ooh, chills. But wait a minute. That's it? This was a man? I kind of knew that. But yet Antony has this elan about him. He's got this style, and it really works, and it does sound deep. And afterwards, you get a few more lines because cheesy Octavius ruins the moment by saying, we're all going to have a funeral and have some fun on this happy day. Not so much. All right. Well, here's a end note. Dante in Inferno has placed Brutus and Cassius in two of the three mouths of Satan at the center of hell, who's chewing on them, and Judas Iscariot. So it's pretty surprising that two guys get two mouths, and it's these two. I'm sure we can think of other people who deserve to be there and give Brutus and Cassius a reprieve from that. But here's a final comment from, again, my favorite critic, who I say is Harold C. Goddard, about the character of Brutus in the end of all of this. Too practical and idealistic, or what? There are those who consider him one of the most noble and lovable figures the poet ever created. Others cannot conceal their scorn for him. He was a fool, they say, an egotist, an unconscionable prig. If this be true, it is a bit odd that almost everyone in the play seems to think highly of him. And if you've been in the Oxfordian camp for a while, you could think, wow, that nails the Earl of Oxford. All right. So let's stand up, sit down, shake it out, move around for a moment. And we could go into a Q&A. I answered who's my favorite critic, and I tried to keep up with the chat. Not sure I did a very good job. So, anyone in chat or Q&A want to chat or Q&A? I'm here. Yeah, there are signs in the heavens that portend something. This was a Vere. This was a man. All right, I'm gonna zip back up. Get some comments. Antony shaking hands with Caesar's murderers reminds me of Al Pacino as the Godfather giving his brother Fredo the kiss of death. Yeah, it should seem like that, and even maybe align these guys with Judas Iscariot again. The avian augury and supernaturalism of Julius Caesar is very much the same themes in Macbeth. When I've plunged now into Julius Caesar more than I ever have in the past, I have found a lot of parallels with Macbeth. He's thinking of the same thing, but it seems as if a lot of the details are also there. So, as I said, the report of your wife's death, what I didn't say at the time was that we've got this sense that Oxford was maybe preparing a ship for going against the Spanish Armada in 1588 when he heard of his wife's death. So he wasn't on the scene there too. So this case and Fulvia being reported dead and Antony and Cleopatra, there are these wives who end up dying while you're busy with military matters. How does Shakespeare deviate from Thomas North's translation of Amiot's French version of Plutarch's Lives? I haven't compared my translation of Plutarch with the Thomas North translation of Plutarch, but rather just figured that Oxford would have known both of them. And there are a few details in Julius Caesar that are in neither of them. What about a boy in Stratford finding out about Caesar? It is possible. It certainly would have been more likely to find out about Julius Caesar in grammar school than it would be to find out anything about English history or falconry or music or military history or the Italian arts or all the rest. So I don't know. But what would be motivating you to learn about Julius Caesar in, oh God, school, and then say, wow, I was really turned on by a bunch of crap I learned in school, and now I have to write a play about it. I don't know. The autobiographical impulse would suggest that you read something and you say, hey, I identify with this. I'm thinking about this issue. I need to play it out. I need to see it in front of me. Marginalia. Recent marginalia, I'll have to catch myself up on. So that would be still to come. And what I did reference was the Geneva Bible work that Roger Strittmatter has done, and especially that concern over an anointed king. What do you do when you're dissatisfied there? And it seems to have been an obsession. And I'd always thought that, well, yeah, and then somebody had mentioned earlier being in the jury in the trial of Mary Queen of Scots and the rest. You'd have to consider this. And I always had kind of a cheerier notion about Oxford and, underlining, see, you do not mess with an anointed king, but he explores it and he plays it out. So at what point did he actually join or break with Henry Howard and Southwell and Arundel, those guys who really were going to be treacherous to the end? Caesar's refusal to give to the request as a tough guy reflect on Elizabeth being equally tough. The major Elizabeth disconnect It seems as if that Lupercal matter, that the concern about having an heir, that's been pointed out by Oxfordians, that Caesar seems like at that moment to worry about not having an heir. And that's a persistent message in Shakespeare to Elizabeth. You got to do something about this. Any recommended readings on the topic of the inconsistencies, incongruity of the character plot? Absolutely. Christian Smid has a 4-book series, and it's called Inconsistencies. And I lost track of it and remembered reading something that was magical when I first got into Shakespeare. And I finally, after a long, because inconsistencies is not what you're expecting in the title. You expect, revision in Shakespeare or something like that, but he does call it that. And you can check out my website for the specific bibliographical material that you need to track that down. But all of his work is just tremendously good. It's so microscopic and detailed and gives all that typical textual information about where you can detect there's been an addition here or a cut here, or there's this repetition. So this has been introduced. This has been patched together, as Feste likes to say. My website again, coming up very soon. I'll tell you. Hey, Plutarch says 23 wounds on Caesar. Oxford says 33. 33 articles against Thomas Seymour. All right. You got me at 23 because that's a number that shows up in weird, completely arbitrary ways in other Shakespeare plays, 3 times in The Winter's Tale, and it's completely random. So what's the deal with 23? Thanks for thumbs upping me. Yeah, the crown versus coronet in the so-called crown signature by Edward de Vere, 17th Earl of Oxford. David had a chance to kill King Saul, but did not. And that's the passage underlined in the Geneva Bible. Yeah, exactly. So it's the consideration and then whether or not you go through with it. Shakespeare several times employed, what if we do go through with it in history plays, Macbeth, and this one. All right. Well, thanks for everything. What I'm going to do is wrap this up. All right. So, recording of this Shakespeare Illuminated episode, like each one in the series, will be made available on the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship website. That's shakespeareoxfordfellowship.org, where you will also find all manner of resources and links. For most of my commentary today and some more, you can visit my website, michaeldelhoyde.org, where you can also find suggested further reading, a slightly annotated filmography, and other information. If you're watching this on YouTube, links to more information are in the description. Like and subscribe. Also, if you are in the future, come back and save us all. Last, not least, I want to thank our actors Tom Woosnam as Caesar, Costa Chard as Brutus, and Jonathan Dixon as Antony. Additionally, Bellana Bogart, aspiring law school student, as our vocalist, for that damned song I finally got out of endless replay in my head. So I also want to thank the Beatles. I thank Earl Showerman for conceiving of this series and anointing me, and especially the Wizard of Ox, Jennifer Newton, for all that she puts into the behind-the-scenes work. Thanks very much for being here, and you are warmly invited to attend next time for more Illuminations. Our plan is to look at Romeo and Juliet through the Oxfordian lens on a Sunday early in May. Hope to read you there.